I suppose I ought to begin at the beginning. My name is Camila, and my parents are Jack and Lisa. My parents taught in the neighborhood primary school. Dad was constantly preoccupied with business matters. Things were rather normal throughout the first 9 years of my existence. We vacationed, had family dinners, and lived in a comfortable suburban home. You know, the typical things. Dad was constantly working on a new venture. His brain full of plans and fantasies, he would get home late. Mother was the cool person, always there to give a hug or say something kind. She would read to me before bed, assist me with my homework, and bake cookies with me on the weekends. But then everything came apart when I was 9 years old. It was just another Tuesday night. I heard shouts coming from below while I was playing with my dolls in my room. This was not the typical argument, rather it was unsettling. Heart thumping, I scurried down the steps. In the living room, I noticed Mom and Dad. Dad was throwing his arms about, a red expression on him. Mom had mascara pouring down her face as she sobbed. "Lisa, how could you?" Dad screamed, alongside Mark. He came over for supper at our place, my God. Mom started crying now. "Jack, I apologize. It recently took place. I intended for it not to. Didn't intend for what to happen, to ruin our household." Dad's voice included a hint of rage. The following several weeks flew by. Mom and Dad cried a lot. There were meetings with people in suits, and there were quiet phone conversations. Even though I didn't fully comprehend what was going on, I knew it was wrong. And then Dad told me the day we were going away. He bowed before me, his eyes dejected and worn out. "You and I are moving to a new place, Camilla, my darling. For your mom, we're leaving the house." "Mom, why can't we stay here?" My bottom lip quivered as I questioned. Dad scanned the living room, his eyes resting long on the pictures of the family. "We both adore you so much, honey, even if it's complicated. That won't ever alter." I felt like my whole world was falling apart as my dad, and I put my beloved books and plush animals into the back seat of our car and drove away from our residence. I had no idea at the time, but this was only the start of a protracted, agonizing journey. I had no idea how different life would be with Dad. I mean, I kind of expected that we would be suffering at first, but Dad's business went off. We were moving into this enormous house, even bigger than our last one, before I knew it. Living in such a luxurious place while still feeling so unstable within was strange. Dad worked nonstop. He would leave the house before I even got out of bed and return after I went to bed. I would frequently find myself at the home of Dad's parents, Robert and Eleanor, also known as Grandma and Grandpa. Grandma would say, attempting to keep me occupied, "Camilla, honey, come help me with these cookies." When Grandpa took me to the garden, he taught me the names of every plant. Although they were pleasant, it wasn't the same as having my parents in the house. Dad was different, I suppose, stricter when he was home. His first question whenever he entered the room was, "Camilla, have you finished your homework?" Or, "Camilla, there's a mess in your room." Before supper, tidy up. He seemed to be struggling to balance being a parent and a parent figure. He was trying, though, so I had to give it to him. He declared Sundays to be daddy-daughter days every Sunday. Just the two of us would go out and do things. His favorite game was mini golf. He would become engrossed in it, being silly and competitive. "Camila, be careful." He'd say, "I'm going for a hole-in-one," and make me laugh even though I wasn't laughing. We used to go buy ice cream occasionally. I would consistently order the triple chocolate fudge, and he would become uncomfortable. He'd remark, "How can you eat that sugar bomb?" and sneak spoonfuls when he thought I wasn't watching. Other times, we'd hit up the local museum. Dad would read every single plaque out loud, putting on different voices for each one. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. He'd say in this ridiculous pirate voice, making me giggle, and the other visitors stare. When I turned 10, Dad signed me up for piano lessons. I wasn't too thrilled about it at first, but it turned out to be pretty cool. Dad would come to every recital, sitting in the front row with this big, goofy grin on his face. Even when I messed up, which was a lot, he'd be the first one on his feet, clapping like I'd just won a Grammy or something. But even with all that good stuff, I couldn't help missing Mom. Some nights, when Dad was working late, I'd pull out our old family photo albums. There was Mom, smiling in every picture. I'd trace her face with my finger, trying to remember what her laugh sounded like or the smell of her perfume. Once a month, like clockwork, I'd get to see Mom. These court-ordered visits became the highlight of my calendar, circled in red and counted down to with a mix of excitement and anxiety. The first time I saw her after the split, it was awkward as hell. We just stood there, staring at each other like strangers. Then Mom burst into tears and pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. After that, our visits became a whirlwind of activities and indulgence. It was like Mom was trying to cram a month's worth of loving into a single day. She'd take me shopping, buying me clothes that made me feel grown up and cool. I remember trying on this crop top and thinking I was hot. "You look beautiful, sweetie," Mom gushed when I wore it. At home, Dad nearly had a heart attack. "Absolutely not," he said, his face turning red. "Go change now." I stomped up to my room, furious. "Mom lets me wear it," I muttered. "Well, I'm not your mother," Dad shot back. The next visit, Mom took me to this fancy cafe, the kind of place with tiny sandwiches and waiters in bow ties. "Order whatever you want, honey," Mom said with a wink. I went nuts. Chocolate cake, ice cream sundae, 3 different kinds of soda. By the end, I was so hyped up on sugar, I was practically vibrating. Dad wasn't thrilled when I came home bouncing off the walls. "What did she feed you?" he grumbled, watching me zoom around the living room. But the best visit was when Mom surprised me with a trip to Adventureland, the local amusement park. We rode every roller coaster twice, screaming our heads off and laughing until our sides hurt. As we sat on a bench, sharing a massive cotton candy, Mom got this faraway look in her eyes. "Remember when we used to have family picnics in the backyard?" She said softly. "Your dad would burn the burgers, and we'd end up eating ice cream for dinner." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. Those memories seemed like they belonged to someone else now. Mom squeezed my hand. "I miss those days, Camila. I miss you. Maybe someday we could be a family again." My heart leaped at her words. "Really?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "We'll see, sweetie. We'll see." For weeks after, I daydreamed about moving back in with Mom, about our family being whole again. But then I'd look at Dad, see him trying so hard to make pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse, and feel guilty for even thinking about leaving. Just before my 12th birthday, Mom dropped a bombshell. She was getting married to Mark. Yeah, that Mark, with whom she'd had an affair. The wedding was like something out of a fairy tale. Mom looked stunning in her white gown, and Mark, well, he looked happy. I stood there in my frilly bridesmaid dress, watching them exchange vows, and felt torn in two. Part of me was happy for Mom. She was glowing, laughing in a way I hadn't seen in years. But another part of me couldn't help thinking about Dad, alone in our big empty house, probably buried in work or binge-watching some crappy TV show. After Mom and Mark's wedding, things started to change. Our visits took on a new flavor. Mark was always there now, hovering in the background like an eager puppy. He'd ruffle my hair and say stuff like, "I always dreamed of having a daughter just like you, Camila." It was nice, I guess. Weird, but nice. The way Mom would beam at him when he said it, like he just handed her the moon or something, made me feel good too. Like maybe this whole messed up situation could work out after all. Mom started talking more and more about me living with them. She'd go on and on about this room they were planning for me. "It'll have a window seat," she'd say, her eyes sparkling. "Just like you always wanted, and we can paint it any color you like." I'd nod and smile, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. It felt like betraying Dad to even think about it. Our shopping sprees became less frequent. Instead, we'd have these big family dinners at their place. Mark would cook. He wasn't half bad, actually, and then regale us with stories about his work. Mom would hang on his every word, and I'd sit there pushing food around my plate, feeling like a third wheel in my own family. When I turned 14, everything kicked into high gear. Mom started calling me every week, sometimes more. She'd show up at my school events unannounced, bringing me flowers or taking me out for ice cream. After, Camilla, she'd say, stirring her coffee, "You're old enough now to decide where you want to live. The courts would listen to you." I'd freeze up every time she brought it up. Part of me wanted to jump at the chance to go back to the way things were before, but another part wasn't so sure anymore. One day, she showed up at my debate club meeting. I was in the middle of arguing about climate change when I saw her slip into the back of the room. After it was over, she rushed up to me, beaming. "Oh, Camila, you were wonderful," she gushed. "If you lived with us, you could join the debate team at your new school. They're state champions." I felt my stomach clench. "Mom, I just think about it, okay," she said, squeezing my arm. "We want you home with us." As I watched her leave, I felt torn in two. Home? What did that even mean anymore? That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I thought about Mom and her new perfect life with Mark. I thought about Dad working himself to the bone to give me everything I needed. I was 14 years old, and the weight of the world felt like it was on my shoulders. How was I supposed to choose? How could I possibly make a decision that wouldn't hurt someone I loved? My 15th birthday was coming up, and instead of being excited, I was dreading it. Mom and Dad were at each other's throats about who would host my party. It all came to a head at this family dinner at Dad's place. "She's been living with me for years, Lisa," Dad growled, stabbing his fork into his steak. "Of course I'm hosting her party." Mom's eyes flashed. "She's my daughter too, Jack. I have a right to celebrate her birthday." I just sat there, pushing my peas around my plate, wishing I could disappear. Then Mom dropped the bomb. "Camila," she said, her voice suddenly soft, "you're old enough now to decide where you want to live. Who do you choose?" The room went dead silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me. Mom's hopeful, Dad's hurt, Mark's expectant. My throat closed up. I couldn't breathe. "I want to live with Mom," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The look on Dad's face, God, I'll never forget it. It was like I'd reached into his chest and ripped out his heart. He just crumpled. Before I knew it, I was packing my bags. Mom and Mark were over the moon, helping me move my stuff into their place. Dad just stood in the doorway, watching, his eyes hollow. "You can come back anytime, Pumpkin," he said as I left. Anytime. The first few weeks at Mom and Mark's were like a dream. They took me shopping for my new room, letting me pick out this super expensive, trendy bedroom set. They enrolled me in this family-friendly private school, Westfield Academy. "You'll get a top-notch education here," Mom gushed. This is the start of a bright future, Camila. And the family game nights. They were a blast. We played Monopoly or Con, laughing and trash-talking each other. For a while, I thought I'd made the right choice. But then things started to change. It started small. Mom making comments about my clothes or my hair. "Honey, are you sure you want to wear that? It's not very flattering," or "Mark's niece always looks so put together. Maybe you could try styling your hair like hers." Then it was my grades. I was struggling to keep up at Westfield. It was way harder than my old school. A B-, Camila. Mom frowned, looking at my report card. "You know Mark's niece is top of her class. Maybe you're not applying yourself enough." The game nights became less frequent. More and more often, I'd come home to find a note on the fridge. "Gone out with the Petersons. Leftovers in the fridge. Don't wait up." I'd heat up my dinner and eat alone in my room, staring at the fancy decor that suddenly felt cold and impersonal. The final straw was the vacation they'd been promising me. This amazing trip to Hawaii for months. I was so excited, counting down the days. Then 2 weeks before we were supposed to leave, Mark sat me down. "Listen, kiddo," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "We're going to have to postpone the trip. Just some financial stuff we need to sort out. You understand, right?" I nodded, forcing a smile, but inside I felt something crack. That night, I lay in my fancy new bed in my fancy new room in this house that was supposed to be my home, and I cried. I cried for the life I'd left behind, for the dad who was probably sitting alone in his big empty house, for the little girl who thought she could have it all. The days leading up to the final custody hearing were tense. Mom was all smiles and reassurances, but I could feel the undercurrent of anxiety in the house. It was like walking on eggshells, everyone trying to pretend everything was perfect. I couldn't sleep. The pressure of the upcoming hearing, the growing unease I felt in this house, it all swirled in my head, keeping me awake night after night. It was about a week before the hearing when it happened. I woke up in the middle of the night, my throat dry as sandpaper. Figuring everyone was asleep, I crept downstairs for a glass of water. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Mom and Mark having what sounded like a heated discussion. I froze, not wanting to interrupt. That's when I heard it. "I'm tired of pretending that I like having her here." Mark's voice was harsh and annoyed. "The kid is constantly draining our resources." My heart stopped. I pressed myself against the wall, hardly daring to breathe. I know," Mom replied, her voice low and urgent. "But think about the tax breaks and the alimony. Once we have full custody, we'll have a steady income stream from Jack." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Mom was using me for money. Mark's voice again, skeptical. "I hope it's worth it." I didn't sign up to be a full-time dad to a teenager. "Just a little longer," Mom said, her voice soothing now. "Once she's officially ours, we can start setting some stricter rules. Maybe even send her to boarding school." I didn't wait to hear more. I bolted back upstairs, my need for water forgotten. I dove under my covers, shaking, tears streaming down my face. It had all been a lie. The shopping trips, the fancy school, the family game nights. It was all just a show. They didn't want me. They wanted Dad's money. I barely slept that night, replaying their words over and over in my head. When morning came, I dragged myself downstairs, feeling like a zombie. "Morning, sweetie." Mom chirped, way too cheerful. "Ready for breakfast?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I poked at my cereal, my stomach turning. "Everything okay, Camila?" Mark asked, peering at me over his newspaper. "You look a little pale." I forced a smile. "Just nervous about a test," I lied. They exchanged a look. Well, don't stress too much, Mom said, patting my hand. I'm sure you'll do great. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table, to tell them I knew everything, to demand how they could do this to me. But I didn't. I just sat there, nodding and smiling, playing the part of the perfect daughter. As soon as breakfast was over, I retreated to my room. I sat on my bed, staring at the fancy decor that now felt like a prison. What was I going to do? The hearing was in a week. If I didn't say anything, I'd be trapped here with people who saw me as nothing more than a paycheck. The day of the custody hearing arrived like a thunderclap. The courtroom was packed. Mom and Mark sat on one side, both looking confident and put together. On the other side was Dad, with Grandma and Grandpa right behind him. Dad looked tired, resigned, like he'd already accepted defeat. As the lawyers droned on, presenting their arguments, I sat there in silence, my hands clenched so tight my knuckles were white. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me, their expectations pressing down like a physical thing. Finally, the moment came. The judge, a stern-looking woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, turned to me. "Camila," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle, "you're old enough now that your opinion matters in this decision. Who do you want to live with?" The room went dead silent. You could have heard a drop. I could feel Mom's triumphant smile. I could practically taste her victory. Dad just looked broken, like he was bracing for the final blow. I stood up, my legs shaking so bad I thought I might fall over. I took a deep breath, and then I said, "I want to live with my father." My voice trembled but grew stronger with each word. And I don't want to see my mother anymore. The shock in the room was electric. Mom's smile vanished, replaced by a look of utter disbelief. Mark's face went pale. Dad looked like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. The judge leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "Camila, that's a very serious statement. Can you tell us why?" I nodded, swallowing hard. A week ago, I overheard a conversation between my mother and Mark. They said they were only fighting for custody because of the money, the alimony, the tax breaks. They talked about sending me to boarding school once they had custody. They don't really want me. As I spoke, I could see the color draining from Mom's face. Mark couldn't even look at me. His eyes were fixed on the floor. "That's not true." Mom burst out, her voice shrill. "Camila, honey, you must have misunderstood." "Mrs. Parker, please." The judge cut her off sharply. She turned back to me, her eyes kind but probing. "Camila, are you absolutely sure about what you heard?" I nodded, feeling tears start to well up in my eyes. "Yes, Your Honor." I'd sure the judge nodded slowly, then turned to address the courtroom. "In light of this new information, we'll need to take a brief recess. We'll reconvene in 30 minutes. As everyone started to file out, I finally dared to look at Dad. He was staring at me, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and something else. Hope, maybe. I wanted to run to him, to throw my arms around him and beg for forgiveness. But before I could move, a court officer was ushering me out of the room. The next 30 minutes felt like an eternity, but finally we were called back into the courtroom. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The judge cleared her throat, and the room fell silent. In light of the new information provided by Camila, and after careful consideration of all factors involved, I've reached a decision. Custody is awarded to the father, Jack Thompson. Furthermore, Lisa Parker will be required to pay child support. The relief that flooded through me was overwhelming. I looked at Dad, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw him smile, really smile. As we left the courthouse, Mom grabbed my arm. Her face was twisted with anger and hurt. "I never loved you anyway," she hissed. "You're just as stupid as your father." Her words stung, but as I watched her storm off with Mark, I realized something. I was free. Free from the lies, the manipulation, the constant feeling of not being good enough. The next few years were, well, they weren't easy, but they were healing. Dad and I started going to family therapy together. At first, it was awkward and painful, dredging up all the hurt and misunderstandings between us. But slowly, session by session, we started to rebuild our relationship. We learned to communicate, to understand each other. Our bond grew stronger than I ever thought possible. Grandma and Grandpa became my rocks. They were always there with a warm hug, a home-cooked meal, or just a listening ear when I needed to talk. Their unwavering support helped me believe in family again. I gave my all to my studies and extracurricular activities. I impulsively joined the debate team and quickly realized I had a gift for public speaking. I had never felt more powerful than I did when I was speaking from the podium. I felt as though I had at last discovered my voice. Dad gave me a present on my 18th birthday that made me cry. It was a scrapbook that had pictures and souvenirs from my early years. Mom and Dad at the beach, my first day of kindergarten, Christmases, birthdays, and everyday days that were suddenly priceless were among the photos I believed were lost in the divorce. I'm a 20-year-old psychology major at college. My personal experiences motivated me to assist other children going through divorce. I want kids to know that they can survive and even flourish, that they're not alone, and that it's not their fault. I'm still scared by what transpired. There are times when I still feel the hurt from Mom's betrayal, and I question how she could have taken advantage of me in such a way. However, I'm learning to channel that suffering into something constructive by using it as fuel. I started giving talks regarding children's rights during divorce procedures at conferences. I share my tale in the hopes that it will influence someone. It could all be worthwhile if one judge, one attorney, or one parent hears it and reconsiders using a child as a pawn. My father attends all of my speaking events. Grinning with pride, he takes a seat in the first row. Occasionally, I witness him wiping away a tear as I discuss our progress. I haven't talked to Mom since that day of the courts asked for her. I'm not ready to reach out right now, but maybe I will be in the future. Right now, my priorities are becoming better, creating a future, and evolving into the person I want to be. Life isn't flawless. I still deal with self-doubt and challenges with trust. However, I'm surrounded by people who love me for who I am, not for what I can do for them. And I'm learning, developing, and healing.